Okay guys, welcome back to the first video of 2024. Hope everyone's had a good break and back into it, back into the full swing of things. A lot of the content you would have seen now is around cars people are looking forward to in 2024. We closed off the end of last year looking at that. So we'll maybe revisit that in some time to come as some new videos come out. But basically what I thought is, moving to 2024, there's a lot of discussion around economic turmoil and potential recessions and downturn and in this time you generally get a lot of bargains across the board, right? So when markets crash, various things become cheap and other commodities or investments like gold, silver, generally crypto with the halving happening this year shoot up. But I thought applicable to the car scene and what we look at, um, not only what the good bargains would be to keep an eye out on, but more specifically, where do we think a lot of the undervalued or underappreciated supercars are? And we can maybe do this across different categories, right? So sports cars, whatever that we feel. But more importantly, what are the underappreciated supercars that I think will add a lot of value coming into the future, but also things that people just overlook, and I think for a driver or an enthusiast will be a really good proposition, right? And so this is in no particular order. I've basically got two or three that I'm going to speak about to build on. The first one that I want to talk on is actually Ferrari. Right now, Ferrari, when you think about Ferrari, you don't necessarily think that it's an underappreciated car, and for the most part, I don't think they are, right? It's obviously a huge brand, but I think the one platform or car that I think is really underappreciated is the 488 model, right? Now, this builds off the 458, which was, I think, one of the most successful and will be the most successful classic Ferraris looking back. Because it almost bridged the gap between this old styling Ferrari and bringing it into the modern era, right? When you look at the likes of the 360 or the 430, and the way they were styled, and then 458 really brought it into the modern era, future era. And when you look back, I mean, that car now is really, really old, right? It's like um, very, I wouldn't call it a modern car anymore, right? But it could be considered for most people still a modern supercar, right? If you had to drive that past people who are not enthusiasts, they would still think it's a modern Ferrari. And that's, I think, testament to what the car is. Also noting that it's probably, or it is not probably, it is the last naturally aspirated V8, which has also, I guess, played around with the prices a lot in terms of, what they were selling for from a retail perspective is more or less, a lot of the cars, what they're actually selling for today. So the people who have got those cars really haven't lost a lot of money. And I guess that's on the speculation that, it would have been the last V8, which naturally aspirated V8, which it was. And even more so than that, we see now with the 296 going down to a V6, a lot of the maybe future cars in that um, mid-engined, entry level Ferrari supercar range will be V6 engines, right? So it will be the last of the V8. So that's now also, I think, going to start pushing those prices up a bit. So the 458's been a fantastic car, right? I don't think that's underappreciated because I think that's reflective of the value that you're seeing those cars for. But what I do think it gives way to is the Ferrari 488, which was basically the replacement, twin turbocharged, essentially on the same platform, right? And I'm looking at Bring a Trailer. I'm not going to look at Australian car prices because for the most part they are not reflective of a global sort of average. But when I look at the Ferrari 458 as an example, you can see the sales of them are anywhere from just about the 100,000 mark up until 300,000, but the majority of them are sitting within a 200,000 to $300,000 benchmark, right, or range, and that's the Ferrari 458. And when we jump over to the Ferrari 488, you're essentially getting for the same price, so within that 200 to 300,000 range, again, where the most of them are sitting, for the same price, you're getting a Ferrari 458, right? Now, for a select group of enthusiasts, people are going to say the 458 is the one to go for, right? It's the last naturally aspirated V8. It brought Ferrari into the modern era. It looks a lot better. It's designed and it's styled a lot better. And I would agree with you on that. I do think the 458 looks better than the 488 or base 488 as a whole. I will say the 488 Pista, though, is my dream car, and I would take that over a 458 Speciale. But in any case, when we're talking about bases here, I would agree that the 458 is styled better and looks better. However, when you look at it from a holistic perspective, the 488 is a better driving car, right? A lot of people have said this. They said it may not look as good, it may not have sounded as good, but as you know, a whole package in terms of what you're getting a lot more car with the Ferrari 488. And I think because of the, you know, sentimental value of the 458, and maybe the 488 wasn't what people were expecting, right? It was kind of using the same platform and turbocharging it as opposed to developing a totally new car. It's been underappreciated and really hasn't held a lot of its value, and I think in that price range it's a really good bargain. And moving forward, I think it would be a car that people would look back on, you know, in terms of the first turbocharged mainstream Ferrari of its time, right? I'm not talking now F430s and things like that. Sorry, not F430s, F40 in terms of turbocharged. I'm talking sort of the modern, you know, entry-level Ferrari mid-engine car that's available in a V8. So I do think it would be looked upon favorably in the future looking back, and I do think those cars will offer excellent value. So that's the first one. And building off that, the next one, which I think is still more expensive, but I think is still underappreciated and underlooked, is the Ferrari F8, right? So that replaced the 488. And again, I think these cars, if you look at them directly with competitors for the like of McLaren, underperform in terms of performance, right? But Ferrari's never been about direct competition, right? It kind of always positions itself as, you know, its own car in its own category, competing, you know, on its own, and it's got a loyal customer base. And I think the F8 is another build on the 488 where it's often overlooked. It's almost a bridging car if you think of it between a 488 versus, you know, the really new developed 296, which is a total new platform in terms of engine and in terms of chassis and in terms of what the car represents. I would say the 296 is the modern era, you know, entry-level Ferrari, which it is. And the F8 and 488 for me almost so that the F8 almost bridged that gap between what was an aging platform in the 458 and 488 car to what the 296 was. It wasn't supposed to be revolutionary. It wasn't supposed to change the game. It was almost like a filler car to, you know, release something new until the new big step change, which was ready, which was the 296, and then also the SF90, right, which has completely moved the game again, completely forward. So I think the F8, and when you look at the F8 and the way it's styled and what it offers, it's still a Ferrari at heart, right? And I think for the most part, they're really underappreciated cars, right? You see everybody choosing obviously the special models, the 458 Speciale and the 488 Pista. And those are still fantastic and those are dream cars, right? But I think the base still offers a lot of value in the 458, more so the 488, and in the future the F8 as time goes along. And remember, those are all V8s, right? Yes, they're twin turbocharged and maybe they miss a bit of soul, they miss a bit of sound, but when you look at where Ferrari is going in the future and are already having stepped down to a V6, I think those cars are going to pick up in time to come, right? And when you look at something like the F50, right, which has always been overshadowed by the F40 and everybody's dream car, everybody's, you know, wants to drive that. And you've seen in recent times how the interest has picked up on the F50 and the prices have followed accordingly. So I think the 488 and the F8 are going to be ones to look out for in the future. And I think they're really good value, right? So that's enough about Ferrari. I think the only other two that I want to speak about is the McLaren 765 LT. Now, I'm not referring to it as a bargain, but I think it's underappreciated, right? When you look back and you look at essentially the McLaren 720S, that again was, for me, the car that brought or pushed McLaren ahead of its competitors in the time that it was launched. It looked really, futuristic, and everybody was questioning the styling, and it had monstrous performance ahead of the competitors, and it was, light years ahead. And then you've had various iterations of that through time. And now you've got the 765 LT, and a lot of people are kind of saying, what's the big difference between, some of the predecessor models that have come before it, and is it really that different? And I think that's why a lot of interest has dropped off on the 765 LT. And then obviously McLaren has been plagued with reliability issues, right? Which is a separate conversation. But I think what you're getting in the McLaren 765 LT, with the way it's styled, being an LT model, that hardcore track focused approach, you're doing under 3 seconds, 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. 500 plus kilowatts, 800 Newton meters of torque, and a real driver's car. I would definitely say it's an underappreciated car. And when you look at the likes of the 600 LT, the 675s, those really special cars, and now people are starting to appreciate what they are and how special they are, as compared to, the run-of-the-mill 720 as an example, and, some of the older models like 570, etc., that have come before it. I think the 765 is going to be a very special car, and is a very special car now, that is probably underappreciated, and that will come up in times to come. I think we'll have a chat around McLaren as a whole, and where we see that company moving forward to in the future, having been bought out, and they've had a history of having financial problems and issues and things like that. But even so, they've come out with some really spectacular cars during those times, like the McLaren P1 as an example, right? And so I think the 765 is a fantastic car, and I think it really, if McLaren are able to progress on what they've delivered with their new ownership, it's going to be very exciting to look at. So 765 for me is one that is underappreciated, and underappreciated from a, not from a financial perspective, but from an enthusiast perspective, let's put it that way. And I think the last one for me is the Honda NSX, right? I've spoken about the Honda NSX before, as I've spoken about many other Japanese cars that I've ranted about. You can go see the previous video. But I think, it was a very big nameplate to live up to, the original Honda NSX. Like now, the Honda S2000, right? The Honda S2000. If there's a predecessor, or sorry, a successor that comes, it's got very big shoes to fill and live up to, its previous generation. So it was always going to be a big ask for the Honda NSX. It's become sort of a legend now in modern times. You've seen the price of these skyrocketing as well, becoming more and more scarce to find. And I think the modern one was a fantastic car, but didn't meet the mark in terms of comparing it to the predecessor, right? As is the case with a lot of cars. So you look at the Supra, right? We've spoken about this before. Does the Supra live up to the old Supra? You look at a lot of the modern interpretations of the old cars, right? Every Evo, I would argue, has been successful. Maybe Evo 10 is in question. I still think it's successful. You look at the current STIs around Subaru, right? And does that live up to the legendary predecessors that it has? And, there's a lot of cars in that sort of realm, right? The M3 is always one that comes up, everyone compares the E30, 36, 46, 92, to the current ones. There's still really good current cars, right? And so the NSX, I think, is a fantastic example of that, where it is a really special car for what it is, but it's just in an awkward place because it can't compete directly with competitors. It's priced, I guess, at that level where it shouldn't be chosen or be competing with those competitors. But it's still and it also doesn't, my opinion, live up to the nameplate of the original, but it's still a fantastic car, right? And it's still unique. It lets itself down maybe in some aspects as compared to other supercars, but it's still special in my book. And I think it's worthwhile, keeping an eye out on the Honda NSX moving forward. The risk with all these type of cars, right? So the Honda NSX, or even the Lexus, right? We've got the LFA, which was a legend. You've got the LC500 now, which is a fantastic Grand Tourer V8. But you know, maybe not as competitive as their competitors. You know, so if you look at the likes of Porsche as an example, you know, two-seater comparing with the LC500, a lot of people will question, why would I spend that money on a Honda? Why would I spend that money on a Lexus? You know, from a reliability perspective, you could make the argument, but I think people who are spending that sort of money aren't really too. It's not kind of their key variable, because it is disposable income, you know, and so it it almost puts the manufacturers in a difficult position as to whether they actually continue those models moving forward. You know, whether you discontinue it because they're not selling well, there's no real great interest in it, and it can lead you down some difficult roads, as we've discussed before with Toyota. You know, where they've had, you know, a couple of years where there's been no innovation, there's been nothing for the enthusiast, and all of a sudden we've got a resurgence of the GR brand in Toyota, right? So Honda NSX, I don't think a lot of people will be running out to buy now, like the Lexus LC500, which I think is criminally underappreciated. At the price point that they are, I don't think people will be running out to buy them. But I do think they're underappreciated, and I think the people who have bought them, or who are looking to get one, will be very pleased in their acquisition, because of the value that it's going to give them, the price point, the reliability, and it's just something a bit different, right? Everybody's got a Porsche, and yes, it's, you know, 911 Turbo S, and even the base Carrera, it's an amazing car. You know, the Lexus and the Honda, I think, is a different type of buyer. And I think it's still something that's really special, right? So those are basically the top 4 cars I think that come to my mind when I start looking at underappreciated cars from an enthusiast perspective. There's a couple others, you know, like Maserati, the Gran Turismo, there's a couple Aston Martins in there as well. I think those are plagued in its own problem with reliability, and cost of maintenance and things like that on those cars. But I don't think those are really underappreciated, right? I think Maserati, despite having not put out really good cars for decades, is still somewhat seen as a luxury brand to the ordinary person, right? Which blows my mind. Um, and I love Maserati as a brand, so that's very impressive. And the same thing with Aston Martin, right? The average person on the street is not going to know about the reliability of Aston Martin or the current financial problems that it has, right? They're still going to look at it, and it's been associated with James Bond, and you know, it's still seen as a luxury product. So I don't think those are really underappreciated cars. You could argue the same thing with the Ferraris and the cars we've spoken about right now. You know, Ferrari and McLaren are not generally seen as underappreciated brands, but I think those specific models to the enthusiasts, you know, within the bigger brand, are underappreciated. And so yeah, that's just my opinions and thoughts, and maybe as we progress we'll keep a look at, you know, have a look out for some cars that are worthwhile keeping an eye on, that may start dipping in price, that you can grab your hands on. But I'd love to know comments as well. What do you guys think are the underappreciated supercars? Looking forward to your feedback in the future. Cheers.